Live from the Partners Neighborhood Bar and Grill in beautiful downtown Huntsville, Alabama.
What time is it?
What time is it?
What time is it?
What time is it? What time is it?
It's tea time with Tierra, darling, where we are spilling the tea.
Hi, everybody. So this is episode number 5, Tea Time with Tierra. I'm going to hand it over to Tierra because everybody's, who is that guy who keeps talking on the thing? Let's talk to the superstar. So here's the superstar, Tierra.
Hi, Pete. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. We got a great show today lined up for you. We got Felicia Fontaine. She's here today, so I'm very interested in talking to her because I need to know a lot more about her. She's an activist, and I need to know more about that. So I guess, first of all, I'd like to say, tell me a little bit about yourself and what you're an activist about. Tell me your story.
Well, I identified myself as gay in Johnson City, Tennessee in 1968. I don't recommend you do that at home. My first involvement was with the 18-year-old vote campaign that led to the 26th Amendment, lowering the voting age. And then I got involved with the women's movement. And always knew that I wanted to work on the issues of LGBT people, that I did not want other kids to go through what I went through. And so when I took off from my hometown and moved into a lesbian commune.
That's interesting.
We used to describe it as a crazy place to get sane or a sane place to go crazy.
That's a good one. That's good.
And it was both. It was wonderful. But I was involved then in the formation of the Tennessee Gay Coalition for Human Rights, 47 gay men and me, because there was a lot of separation between the gay male and the lesbian communities. Women at that point were still fighting for rights just for being women. Lesbian was just an additional...
It was a hashtag, wasn't it?
Right. There you go. And Barb was in the Navy, and that meant we had to go to Norfolk, and that we couldn't be terribly out, but we always maintained a home where people were welcome to hang out, and that's where we were married in the Metropolitan Community Church in 1980. 2 years later, we wound up in Huntsville, and located the Pink Triangle group that was here. In fact, we're having a little reunion this week with some old members who are, from a distance that happen to be in town right now. So, and then I got involved in NOW and worked primarily on women's rights. But I think it's important to remember or understand that LGBT rights legally rests on the rights of women. If you read the Lawrence decision, it's based on two cases. Based on multiple cases, but one was Griswold versus Connecticut in 1968. It established the right to use contraceptives. And then Roe v. Wade came in 1973, and that expanded the right to personal privacy. And so the legal decisions that affect us really are rooted in those decisions for women's rights. So I did now for a while, and then when the MCC started here, I was still involved with now, but I was actually ordained when I was 18 years old, and had my master's in counseling. Always felt a calling to go back, and so I was got involved with the church, and ultimately became student clergy and credentialed within MCC. Worked at the church there. I was the director of Samaritan Family Services, which was a counseling center. And then when I got sick, I had to retire. And began working with Mel White, who I had worked with previously in MCC. He was Minister of Justice. And in I continued. I also throughout worked with AAC and facilitated a support group as well as did individual counseling. And then in 1999, when Mel sent me an email saying, "Are you willing to come to Lynchburg, Virginia, to attend Thomas Rhodes Baptist Church with 5,000 other gays? Are you interested?" And I said, "Oh yeah." And so that led to the first formal Soulforce event, which was a sit-down between 200 of us and 200 folks from Jerry Falwell's Rolodex. And, I could spend hours talking about that, but that was certainly one of the more interesting experiences. And so, parallel to that, Reverend Helene Loper in Tuscaloosa had gotten involved with Soulforce's interaction with the Presbyterian Church, and in fact was arrested at a demonstration in California. And in order to form a state organization, we had to have two people who had participated in national actions, who had been through that training. And so Soulforce, Alabama was the first state Soulforce organization formed.
Well, you mentioned the pink triangle. I have heard that throughout, but I wasn't quite sure. You hear things, but you're not quite sure what it represents. So was you around the upside down pink triangle, or is that the terminology?
Well, the pink triangle became a symbol for the community after the book Men of the Pink Triangle came out in 1972. And the symbol of the pink triangle was developed by the Nazis. And it was the symbol that homosexuals were required to wear in the concentration camps that designated them as homosexuals. And the real tragedy is that when the camps were liberated, they were considered legitimate criminals, and so they were not liberated. Lesbians, they weren't particular about dividing up categories for women, because women just don't matter that much. And so the black triangle, lesbians had to wear a black triangle along with any other woman who didn't live up to the Third Reich's expectations of womanhood.
So just women in general had to wear, if they didn't live up to that expectation.
Assuming that they weren't Jews or gypsies or some other group, but black triangles were fallen women, and pink triangles were men. And so the community adopted that symbol for a long time. As, that was our never again symbol. In fact, I still have a never again button with the pink triangle and the slash mark. it really reached it. I mean, it really reached its zenith at the beginning of the AIDS crisis, when people were dying right and left, mostly young gay men. And someone, we still don't know who, put up a sign that had a pink triangle on a black field and the word "silence equals death" underneath it. And that became, long before the red ribbon, that became the symbol for the struggle for care and treatment and research into AIDS.
That's interesting. I didn't know that either. I knew that I was going to learn a lot from you today, though. I knew that. So, very interesting.
Like, I came out before Stonewall. So.
Well, you've loaded me with some information today that I will want to remember. So, Pete, do you have anything you'd like to ask her?
Well, first, we're going to be right back. Let's take just a small break. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. So anyway, yes, I have, my gosh, so many stories. I guess first of all, you had said something about the human rights, and I really totally believe in that it's been a progression of human rights. Yes. Yeah. So you want to talk a little bit about the progression, like, the first the race, and then women, and then, like you say, gay and that type of thing.
Well, it's really been cyclical. I mean, the first calls for abolition were in the 1700s. There were those who wanted to abolish slavery when the government was formed. So, that's always been part of America's original sin, as they say. The first proclamation for women's rights, well, actually the very first one was Dolly Madison talking to James as they were going off to draw up the Constitution. And she told him quite famously, "Please remember the ladies." Which he forgot as soon as he got with the guys. But Seneca Falls was in 1843, and that was the first proclamation for women's rights. And, there was a lot of activity. And then, of course, the Civil War and the failure of Reconstruction made the race issue actually even worse. During slavery, black men at least had economic value to their owners. Once that system was over, particularly in the Jim Crow South, they created the system of peonry, which meant that a white man could accuse a black man of owing him money, and the sheriff would arrest him, and he had to work it off with the landowner. So surprisingly, there were lots of black men who happened to owe money right about the time it necessary to pick cotton, and the sheriff would round up all kinds of workers who then had to work the season with no pay, and some were held for a lifetime. And, there were early, the first gay organization in the country was in 1924 in Chicago.
I did not know that. Did you know that?
1924.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
That took some guts back then, right?
Well, and then you go to the Harlem Renaissance, and there was a very active gay culture there. That's where Bayard Rustin emerges from, who you may or may not know was a major leader in the black civil rights movement and openly gay. He was the director of the 1963 March on Washington, and Eleanor Holmes Norton says to this day he's the only person who could have pulled it off. And he did it with 3x5 cards in his back pocket. Wow. No computers, very little telephone. So they're cyclical. And, after World War II was really a major turning point because, first of all, it had been fought on the base of racism and eugenics. Second, women went into the workforce and liked it. So you had GIs coming back who had fought for freedom for the world, who were then told, you have to sit behind the German POWs in the train because you're black.
Wow.
And when the train came from New York down to Washington, then they could sit in the front with everybody else. But when they started south, they had to get off and get back into the back of the train.
Wow.
And so they were legitimately asking questions about, what was I fighting for if I don't have freedom, if I don't have rights, if I don't have equality in this land that I fought for? And so you had the emergence of, Bayard Rustin was active through the war and afterwards. You had the sit-ins, of course, Montgomery and Rosa Parks in 1955, that really launched an awareness of the status of blacks in the South, which a lot of people in the country knew nothing about. But the rest of the country was just as segregated. It just wasn't written in law and enforced by the local sheriff. And the women who had been Rosie the Riveter had, gone back into the home and had her kids in the 50s. And, the kids were growing up and they started saying, is this all there is? Am I just supposed to, I worked, I made an income, I liked that. I want to do that again.
Sisters doing it for themselves, right?
Betcha. You betcha. And so that led to the formation of NOW in 1966. Actually, President Kennedy established the first commission on the status of women in 1963. And each one has built on the other.
You used each other as like a platform and like shoulders to stand on?
Yeah. The development of the LGBT community is a little different because, if you've seen the play The Normal Heart, you've seen it? Okay. They talked about freedom to fuck. That was what the men's goals were. But women were still fighting for their rights as women. They were still fighting for a fair paycheck. The fact that they were lesbians was just an additional. So, the first real convergence did come around AIDS because, and at that point, the women's community, the lesbian community, was far more organized because it had come from this very organized, relatively well-funded movement from the women's movement. And lesbians were in a position to look after men who couldn't look after themselves. And at one point, 70% of the CBOs in the country had been started by lesbians or were run by lesbians.
Okay, what's a CBO?
Community-based organization like AAC. Community-based organization.
Yeah.
So, one of the projects that I'm working on with Soulforce is collecting this history. We're doing interviews with people to create an archive, video history. And if we get, some of the things that we need and want, then we may try to put together a larger project of using those interviews along with to tell the history of. From where I sit, I see that we went from the pink triangle to rainbows, but we had to go through AIDS to get there. And I'm just delighted at the rainbow generation. But they have, very different life experiences. We'd like to think it's safe now, but we know full well it's not for gay teens. And young gay people, and we know that the churches are still doing a horrendous amount of damage. Soulforce's bottom line is to challenge the religious right, to go at the problem at the roots. And so we have a couple of things going on here right now. One is when we're kind of keeping off the public table because we're trying to open a dialogue with an institution. But we're doing the video, the archives, collecting our stories. And I actually have been able to arrange to interview both Mel White and Reverend Troy Perry as part of this collecting the early history, as well as a really neat woman in Birmingham who's 84 and has an amazing story to tell of the course of the movement.
Well, that's just beautiful, and I think that totally T-TimeWithTierra and you and us we can all join hands, join hand with us, because that's totally where we're about love and light and being kind to another is what Tierra's thing is, and it's all about this generation being able to embrace and stand on the shoulders of giants like you. And even like Tierra and I, a little bit, and be able to say, I have these rights now, and gosh darn it, I'm going to stand for them,
And we are at a point where we may be losing some of our history. When Don't Ask, Don't Tell finally came down, nobody mentioned Leonard Matlovich.
I've never heard the name.
Never heard of Leonard. In 1972, he 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star for action in Vietnam. He was an Air Force sergeant. He came out and said, "I want to serve as who I am." And of course, the military went apoplectic, and he fought for years and years through the courts, and eventually won his case. But when he reported to Langley in Tidewater, where we were at the time, they wouldn't let him on post, and he also had become infected. But Lee was a great guy. He was one of those pioneers that has sort of been lost. And his headstone says, "I received I received a Silver Star for killing 2 men and a discharge for loving 1."
Oh wow, that's powerful right there.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
So now Soulforce is a national group, is that right? And you have your own society here in Alabama?
Yes, there is a national Soulforce National. We are an independent corporation of that, and but we do have connections and affiliations with the national organization. And it is initially there were several states that set up organizations. Alabama is the only one from that first bunch to still be here, but the national organization is working on state projects in different places now.
I think it's interesting what you said about the ebb and flow, because I heard an interview with RuPaul, who's all our champions, and he was talking about how the community for drag queens and for gays has really come forward, but he thinks it's gonna kind of pull back a little bit. So right now, I think it's really out there, and we really have a lot that we can do. And I think now is the time, while the iron's hot, for us to do all we can to get all the rights, and then maybe as the tide pulls back out, we just kind of hang on and keep what we've gotten so far. And that's why it's so important for us to get this information out there so that the younger generation can know. Because I'm not of the younger generation, and I don't know any of this stuff.
Well, there are parts of it I wish I didn't know, but I wouldn't trade anything. And I'm not just an activist. My partner and I will be celebrating 35 years together, and we have a daughter and 2 granddaughters and a great-granddaughter.
That's beautiful.
We are family values.
Right.
We are family values.
Right. Yeah. That's amazing. And if everybody doesn't understand what we're talking about, we're just going to leave it up to them to understand. We don't need to. That's enough said right there, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Because I think when you stand up on top of your pulpit and you really pound, that's when you kind of turn people. But if they can come to their own decisions, from your truth.
That's right. That's right. Just lay out the truth, and it will speak for itself.
Exactly. Beautiful. So now I love this coming out stories. That's really kind of interesting. Maybe Tierra and I should kind of touch on. I don't know. Are we prepared, Tierra? What do you think?
What are we prepared for? We're prepared for anything. Okay. We're prepared for everything, So, I guess I kind of didn't hear the last part of what you said.
About our coming out stories, our own personal.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Well, I guess mine's probably, and I've met actually kind of a lot of men, and I've talked to people from other parts of the nation that find this very interesting. But I've met a lot of men here in the North Alabama area that were like me. They got married, they had a kid, they did da-da-da-da-da, and then they came out in their 40s, and that's exactly what I did. I came out.
In my counseling practice, I dealt with a lot of late bloomers.
Yeah, that's what I would. And Dan Savage, God bless his heart, the sex columnist, says when you come out of the closet, you burst out, and I kind of did. So anyway, but that's all over, thank goodness. And now we can come back down to earth. So that was kind of, I guess, the short and sweet of my coming out story. It was a late time, but it was me becoming my own authentic self. And my 3 words for this year are authenticity, wealth, which is actually well-being, and just stepping into faith. Those are my 3 words for this year.
Sounds like good ones to me.
Yeah, it's been great, and this is part of my faith journey right here. And it's so we've touched a little bit on my woohoo stuff before. We won't get too much in there. So how about you, Tierra? Do you want to share anything?
Well, I had a long coming out. It seems like because I'm transgendered. I was born male, but I didn't really identify with being gay. Although
that's a common phenomenon.
So I kind of was lost, and back in I was born in 1970, so at that time, transgender didn't even exist in my household or many people around me. Right. So I didn't really identify with what transgendered was. Right. So, but I came out when I was 16. Well, I kind of got called out.
That happens too.
So my mom found a pair of high heels in my closet. So, and they were really pretty too. There were 5-inch red heel stilettos. It was beautiful. No, she can't walk in heels either. But so I wasn't welcomed at the time, in my family. But as time come along, I identify with a much bigger not resolution, but a coming out. Identifying with being transgender, I was confused. I didn't really know where to either punch the wall or pray about it. Because I was lost. I had nowhere to turn. So I guess just in the past 9 years, I became who I was. I became authentic with who I am. I'm not hiding it. If you know, you know. If you don't, well, ask me if you want to know. Right. And I'm okay with that. For a long time, I wasn't. Because I wasn't sure if it was something to still be ashamed of at that time. Now I know it's something to embrace. Because I'm special. I got a gift, and I'm so glad for forums like this that we can talk about that. So I'm glad I got to share that.
I completely agree that you have a gift because you're able to see everything from both aspects. Do you understand what I'm saying? You can see it from both things. And I was also going to say, with the progression of human rights, I honestly believe that as far as I can see, the transgender generation is the next one to come. That's the next what's the word, coming to rights group that I see happening.
It's fighting its own legal battles. And one of the things that is complicated about the LGBT movement is that we aren't always pointed in the same direction because of our diversity. And, for example, the legal battles that transsexuals are dealing with now are somewhat different than what gay and lesbian couples are dealing with.
Right.
And bisexuals have some of the hardest time of anyone because
because both camps both want them and don't want them,
well,
right?
and some of it is because
Right? Am I right?
because no,
It'd be hard to decide which one to go to.
Yeah.
and when they go to one, how do you trust that they don't want to go to the other one next time?
Right,
So
right.
that's a very difficult situation. But yeah, we're following some different legal tracks, but I like to think of the justice movement as the tip of the spear, and somebody's at the front at different times that's cutting through. Right now, the big issue is marriage equality, which makes such a fundamental difference. I mean, the idea that young people now can actually plan a normal life is so wonderful to me, that they can go to college and have dating relationships and enter careers that they could never have considered before, and so the transgender is moving up in that tip, and I think once we get marriage equality settled, then the movement itself can focus more directly on transgender issues. But there's a long teaching process there. I mean, if when we don't understand who we are, it's hard to teach someone else.
Amen.
Right. Yeah. And that's going to be a real education for, if, like you say, for even the transgendered community themselves as well as everyone else. And like you say, I love that. How are you going to be able to tell anybody else who you are when you're trying to figure it out yourself? Because that's just such a different paradigm, such a different, view of looking at things, I imagine. Do you have any comments on that, Tierra?
I just wanted to say that one thing that saddens me, I know it's getting better for the transgender community. It seems that it's been little resources for our community that is known. You have to dig deeper. And there are so many girls that really are suffering that don't have the resources, and they go to an underground world of it. And that saddens me. I've been there. I know what it's like. So if there's transgender girls watching us, I'd just like to say, there's a better time coming, and we'll try to provide some resources for the transgender community on here,
Well, we had a really big step forward recently when Social Security agreed to pay, that Medicare would pay for transitions. And I can think of two people in particular who are dead now that would be alive if that had been available to them. So, it's... The other thing is the transgender community is not monolithic. That we still don't separate out gender and sex as being two different things. Sex is a matter of biology. Gender is a social construct. We can determine biologically the sex of an individual, but their sense of themselves in terms of expected sex roles that are associated with gender. There's also the assumption that often transgender, some are heterosexual, some are homosexual. It's a very complex, very rich community, and so there's a lot to teach.
Yes. And I think it would be awesome if that was more out there, So if you've got any resources, anything that I could provide for people from the transgender community, I'd love to have all that information so I can pass it along.
Frankly, most of our resources, and I'll pass on whatever I have, but most of the resources for Soulforce are focused on training people to function from a different way of being. We have 4 steps. The first is to experience the suffering, but don't let it cripple your soul. We are an oppressed people. There's going to be suffering. It's all right to acknowledge it. You just can't let it kill you. The second step is to view our adversaries in a new light, as victims of untruth and ignorance, and not as evil people. We have no enemies. We may have adversaries, but every person is potentially my friend. The third step is to tend to the wounded, which I think is where the community is excelling in a new way right now, is caring for people, doing the kind of work that you do to outreach and educate and support those in need of support. And then the fourth step is to attack the root causes of oppression, which I think is becoming increasingly clear are the religious right, and the purveyors of untruths about people who are different, and it plays itself out, very vocally with respect to our community. But, we just saw a major Supreme Court decision that fundamentally altered the parameters of religious freedom by saying, well, corporations can now have religious freedom. And, there is no justification for our oppression apart from these distortions of religious texts. And, well, it's always been this way. So that is our primary goal. We reach out to adversaries. And, in fact, the first thing we did here in Alabama, and it took us over a year to get there, but I requested a private meeting with Chief Justice Roy Moore. And eventually we were able to sit down and talk.
That's the king of 10 commandments, right?
Well, he was at that point. He's now the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, who will be hearing any cases that are brought through this state. And I've kept confidential most of what we discussed. And, neither one came away with a whole new epiphany or revelation, but neither one could be the same afterwards. And so, for example, the project that I mentioned that we're kind of keeping off the table right now is an encounter of that nature. We're trying to open up a dialogue with an institution that should not be discriminatory, but continues to be.
Yeah. Well, that's going to happen just with dialogue and just when people see you not as a this or that, but as a person. They see your personhood, and that kind of opens up.
And a person of faith. and a person of faith. I mean, Helene and I are both ordained ministers. We have other clergy, and we have, and laity. We are interfaith. We're not a Christian organization. We just recognize that self-described right-wing conservative Christians are doing harm in Jesus' name. And even Gandhi required his followers, when he was trying to liberate India, to study on the teachings of Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount especially, but also the idea of voluntary sacrifice, that good comes from voluntary sacrifice. If those kids had not marched in Birmingham and confronted dogs and fire hoses, and those pictures gone out around the world, that was voluntary suffering that had a redemptive outcome.
I bet you in a lot of those cases, though, that probably was not painful to them because they were just being led by their spirit, and so it was probably in some cases, I'm just going to say, maybe even joyful in a way.
They were well trained, and when we do a training, that's one of the things that we emphasize. What was so remarkable and what was so moving and touching was that they never raised a hand to defend themselves. And likewise, we take a vow of nonviolence. I actually have an obligation to protect Roy Moore from untruths that are perpetuated about him. And if you read the letter from Birmingham jail, you will see the methodology that was laid out to prepare people, and even down to, being willing to stand there and be beaten without reacting. When the voting rights workers were preparing to come down, particularly large groups from Chicago, they actually had practices to control passions that involved standing there and taking a punch and not reacting against it.
Wow, that's some commitment.
It is, but it was that kind of commitment. And so what we are slowly trying to bring, as the community develops, people with the commitment to nonviolence who will be, we are finally in the position of committing civil disobedience in this state, which I did with my partner when we refused to file a separate income tax returns. We filed a single joint return. And I made that public on April 15th. The Alabama Department of Revenue responded on the 26th, and I don't think they've ever done anything that fast in their history.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's interesting how quickly they can find a clerk to take care of that, right?
yeah.
That poor clerk, I can't even imagine.
Well, it wasn't signed, so I have no idea.
Interesting, yeah. So how about, would you like to play a little bit of a game right now?
What kind of game?
We're going to play a game called What's in Tierra's Box. Are we ready?
Uh-oh.
Now, did you want to participate, or do you want Tierra to? Because what it is it's a box, and then you got to guess what's inside. Do you want to participate, or do you want just Tierra to do it?
I'll defer to you on this one.
All right, so Tierra gets to guess what two things are. Okay, I'm gonna give Tierra this mic while I get prepared over here.
Now, how come you don't want to find out what's in my box? It's this little game. It's gonna be fun.
Box. I settled down with one years ago.
That is awesome. I'm kind of happy that I hear somebody that has that long-term commitment, because this day and time it's hard to find people that have that history with each other. I've been single for 4 years, and I'm thinking I'm not settling. It's been 4 years, so it's going to be the right one the next time.
Well, you have to find someone you can live with, not someone you can't live without.
Amen. I'm still looking.
Alrighty, so now Tierra's going to close her eyes and she's going to open the box and she's going to see if she can figure out what this is. Yeah.
Is it open?
Yes.
Oh my God, what is that? Oh, it's a. Oh.
She looked.
I'm sorry. Oh, it's a bell. It's a teacup. Well,
That's perfect for tea time with Tierra.
cheers. Okay. Okay, that is perfect for tea time.
I'll check out that box if you.
Oh, now you're ready to check it out, huh? Oh, that one, yeah. Oh, we've got people in the audience laughing. Okay.
Okay.
Close your eyes now.
Yep.
See, I would have went a different direction. I've been like, oh, it's. I think so too. Wasn't this supposed to be yours? Okay. Oh goodness.
That's got some fun.
All right. Yeah, that was fun. Okay, y'all, we'll be right. All right, y'all, we're right back. I'm going to give it to Tierra. Tierra's got some more probing questions.
Just a quick question. I was wondering, so perhaps someone watches the video, the TV show, and they want to know more about it, or they didn't quite understand it or didn't catch it. They're trying to rewind it and, like pushing the little button. Is there a place, like a website or something that I could send them to?
There are a number of gay history sites, and ironically, Wikipedia has an excellent selection from the history, and going back to what was originally called the homophile movement, and that meant same love. So when the first organization started, the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis in the 1950s, it was the homophile movement because it didn't want to be identified as being about sex, it being about love. It didn't become the homosexual or gay rights movement until after, well, Troy Perry started MCC before Stonewall. MCC was active on the West Coast before Stonewall. But the homophile movement, the language changed after Stonewall.
So they can just Google gay history and Wikipedia. There's several things you can find out there. So if you're looking for more information, she's gave you some web advice that you can go and find some things on.
They should also be able to contact us, Tierra, and we'll help with any resources.
Right. Pete and I would be glad to help. And do you have a website of your? Do you have a website of your own? Of your own?
We do not have an active website right now. We have an active Facebook page.
Okay, and that is
Soulforce, Alabama.
okay. Soulforce. Soulforce, Alabama.
Actually derives from the Indian word satyagraha that Gandhi coined for his methodology of nonviolent direct action.
Oh, interesting. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being our guest today. I've had a great time. Thank you so much. I want one too.
Yes, thank you so much. And so we're gonna say goodbye for now. Thank you. Bye. So we're after the show, and what did you think?
Great show. I mean, full of information. I was amazed.
Right, and there's so much about the history that I didn't know, and I'm supposed to know this stuff.
I'm 44, and she enlightened me more today about history than in my entire years of being out.
Right.
So I was happy to have her. I'm so glad that we got a chance to get to know her.
It's amazing. What's so amazing is just realizing the shoulders of the giants that we stand upon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's an awesome journey today with her.
Yeah, I mean, because we take so for granted that you and I are able to do this. You know,
Right.
that we're not, we're not like being tarred and feathered and,
We're at one
you
time
know,
out in.
which feathers, I don't know. Sometimes feathers are.
Well, please, Mary. But it's amazing because we're able to do this. Where at that time,
Right.
at one time, this was not able
Right.
to be done.
Right. And we're in the South and the whole 9 yards.
We're getting better, aren't we?
Yeah, it always
And-
gets better.
And things are going right.
Right. So, I hope y'all enjoy the show.
Check
You know
it.
we did.
Yes,
So
and-
we know you are.
And thank you for your support.
Yes.
And remember, be kind to one another.
We love you. Love,
you.
peace, release. Mwah. Oh, we gotta do the
Mwah.
mwah. Okay, y'all live and learn. Bye.